الحمد للمتوحد بجلاله المتفرد وصلاته دوما.
حمدا ومصليا أما بعد. I'm going to kick off straight away because we don't have an awful lot of time. If you've looked at the text, do you have the mutton? Have I sent you the mutton? Yeah? Okay. If you look at the opening of the mutton, what I'll do is I'll send it to Maulana and he can email that out to everybody. I'm sure he's going to probably put everybody into some sort of email list or something. So I'll send you out a text translation of the mutton of al-Iji. In fact, it is somewhere online. You can find it. But this is more of an introductory discourse to the Hadith where the Holy Prophet ﷺ spoke about the different sects. So that's really the focus that we're going to do. Before I begin, let me just start and I'll go along through the PowerPoint. So this lesson delves into the interpretations of the term Ummah. Because if you look at the beginning of the text, he begins with Bismillah. And as many of you know, most of the great texts, they begin with Al-Basmala. The Holy Prophet ﷺ said, كُلُّ أَمْرٍ ذِي بَالٍ لَمْ يُبْدَأْ بِبِسْمِ اللَّهِ فَهُوَ أَبْتَرُ. That any act of any worth that's begun without reciting Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim in the name of Allah, it's abtar. And abtar, the scholars mention, meaning it's void of barakah, void of blessing. There's a hadith, a weaker hadith for Alhamdulillah as well. So often the ulama, they combine these two together. So when we actually start reading the text from the next session, all of that inshallah ta'ala will be very clear. So al-Iji rahmatullah alayhi, he does start with al-Basmala. Very, very quickly, for those of you that perhaps followed the original podcast about the development of Kalām, I talked a little bit about Iji therein, and I mentioned that I situated him into a world, to give you some context, that he's in the Persian world, particularly in the al-Khalid period. He comes from a scholarly family. His father is Qadi Adud. What that means is that he is, as I mentioned in the podcast, the equivalent to what we would call in the Ottoman Empire a Shaykh al-Islam. It's an official post. It's really the highest ranked scholar in the region. He's very, very close to the Sultan. In fact, the Sultan gives him a mobile home, basically, where he travels around with the Sultan and his army on their expeditions. As you know, in that period, as part of their growth, they were often on conquest. It's just the nature of the world in the medieval period. Not too dissimilar from today, but perhaps done in a more succinct and proxy manner. But nevertheless, probably the same. So he was the Shaykh al-Islam that would accompany the army. He was somebody that would give direct counsel to the Sultan himself. Very, very high ranked. And he was a person of fatwa, has a collection of fatwas and a number of different books that he writes. But the key point about al-Iji, is that al-Iji is the Imam of the Asharis in his period. His students are the likes of al-Muhaqqiq al-Taftazani. I mean, it tells you something. Anyone that knows anything about al-Sunnah and their Kalām tradition, they know the importance of al-Muhaqqiq Sa'aduddin al-Taftazani rahimahullah, the likes of Sayyid al-Sharif al-Jurjani rahimahullah. These are serious scholars, heavyweight thinkers, really important for the development of ilm al-Kalām, Sunni ilm al-Kalām, this philosophical theology. Now, Iji is the sheikh of all of these people. Iji is very important. Dawani is arguably in this period one of the greatest minds. And Dawani chooses to write a commentary on this book. Some of you would have seen the podcast, and I did share this book at that time to highlight the fact that although this is just his Aqa'id, I don't know if you can see it, and on it, Mullah Dawani, Jalaluddin Dawani, very little in the English language has been done on Dawani. You can Google him, you'll find some stuff, some papers written, but very little. In the Turkish language, however, if any of you here have Turkish, there's actually a lot on al-Dawani. Not as much as you're going to find naturally on al-Ghazali and al-Razi, but there is a lot on al-Dawani. In fact, you can find entire books, not articles, entire books on a particular idea of ad-Dawani, a particular discussion of ad-Dawani. So ad-Dawani is super, super important. Now, if you're joining in today, or you're watching this later, and you're thinking, well, you're throwing about these names and I'm quite new to Kalām. Well, the reason why I'm doing that is, if I was to say now as-Suyuti, if I was to say Ibn Hajar, if I was to say al-Nawawi, these are names that are almost household names. Why? Because these are scholars of Hadith. And in the 90s, when you had the sort of petrol dollar coming in to the West from al-Saudiyyah, for example, they are generally what we will call Salafi Ahlul Hadith. So for them, Kalām was a problem anyway. They don't like it. They were more focused on Hadith. And so therefore, it was the Hadith scholars that they were promoting and talking about, hence why they became household names. Now, I'm not saying that that's mere coincidence, because I am a Sunni and I believe in divine intervention, and all that really takes place is ultimately the kun of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His saying be, but there wasn't ihtimam, a focus or a due diligence towards Kalām. That's changing. And I mentioned this in other classes, largely because of living in the West and now becoming intelligent. We're not first generation diaspora Muslims now, where we don't even have the language to engage. We're now second, third, fourth generation Muslims, reverts, etc. Many of us are well aware of sort of the Western context in terms of its philosophical, political and economic paradigms, and we're beginning to filter that through an Islamic tradition, and therefore we're looking for that Islamic tradition once again to be able to do that. And when we've done that, and there are many people that have done that, and when they've gone to do that, who have they found? They found al-Ghazali, they found al-Razi, they found all of these great mutakallimun. So that's really why this is all happening. So if I'm throwing these names around like a Dawani, etc., it's because they need to now become household names, because if we want to know the tradition, intellectual tradition of Islam, and to use it to navigate our contemporary times, then these names are going to have to become very, very important to us. So al-Dawani is super important, Jalaluddin al-Dawani. He writes a commentary. Now al-Galambawi, there are a number of people working on al-Galambawi right now. Galambawi is very late. In fact, we have a portrait of him, interestingly. He's a very late Ottoman scholar, Galambawi, rahimahullah ta'ala. Mustafa al-Galambawi, Ismail bin Mustafa al-Galambawi, rahimahullah. A great Ottoman scholar, a mathematician, an astronomer, a logician. He has a book called Al-Burhan, where he actually adds to the discussion of logic. Of course, he has his famous commentary on the Isa Ghoji and a primer of Al-Abhari on Arabic logic. But his Burhan is like his independent contribution to the science of logic. This is the great Galambawi. So Galambawi is really, really important, and he's late. That makes him even more interesting. So what we want to do is we want to look at this hadith based upon a few discussions. As you can see, I've only made a few slides for this lesson. And the reason being is because it's actually quite interesting and quite dense. Now there's an exercise that's going to happen here. What you're going to get today is not only an introduction to the Aqa'id of al-Iji, but you're going to get a little bit of an insight into how scholars used linguistic arguments. They use linguistics, rhetoric, to interpretate the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Now what that should do, by the way, should I say, is the next time somebody perhaps wonders to themselves, or somebody whispers into their ear, that we have to look at the Quran and Sunnah detached of the scholars and the scholarly intellectual tradition, as is the habit of an unfortunate some, you're going to realize very, very quickly that that is very difficult to do, and that there's a lot of ihtimam. And I'm only going to touch on the surface of what's actually mentioned in the commentary, in the Hashiyah, the super commentary on the text itself, on one mas'ala, how focused they were. Now, in this discussion, he's going to focus on the ummah. Some key words for you. Hadith, I'm sure everyone's aware, but again, just in case somebody isn't. Hadith is referring to statements, actions and silent approvals of the Holy Prophet attributed to him. That's in its most specific meaning. There are alternative meanings and more broader meanings, but that's what it is. Statements, actions and tacit approvals of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. You've got ummah, the idea of nation, and you've got ummatul da'wah. Ummatul da'wah and ummatul ijabah. These are two terms. Ummatul da'wah, I think I'm going to explain here. Naam. Ummatul da'wah here, this is referring to everybody. You know, your friend at work, Jake, your friend, you know, Paul, or whoever it may be, they are from the ummah of a da'wah, meaning that the Holy Prophet's message is for them. They are being addressed in the Holy Revelation. They are. So they are the nation of the Prophet in terms of they are being called. From a purely Maturidi, and I know this is not a Maturidi text, but from a purely Maturidi perspective, Hanafi meaning, Hanafi Maturidi, even if there was a person to whom the da'wah did not come, they are obliged, mukallaf, legally obliged, mukallaf, what does that mean? Legally obliged. Meaning, they will be questioned about it, Yawm al-Qiyamah, and there will be punishment and reward as a consequence. They are morally obliged to have ma'rifatullah, knowledge of God, bi'uqulihim, as attributed to Al-Imam Abu Hanifa, by way of their intellects. That the intellect is a sufficient da'iyah. It's a sufficient call that should create within you a tawajjuh, a inclination towards seeking out that truth. So the aql is sufficient for that. So Abu Hanifa said, no other action will you be questioned about Yawm al-Qiyamah except for knowledge of God, even if a messenger did not come to you. Why? Because the aql is sufficient to tell you that. Meaning it is self-evident. Self-evident. You do not need a prophet to come and tell you that 2 + 2 = 4. That a whole is larger than a part. You do not need a prophet to come and tell you that. Likewise, you do not need a prophet to come and tell you that God exists. Now, the nature of that, his attributes perhaps, some of them at least, the prophets, all of that, that's different. That's a whole different ballgame. But just the ma'rifah itself. So that's da'wah, ummatul da'wah. As for al-Ash'ari, because this is an Ash'ari book, the greatest exponent of this discussion is Hujjatul Islam, Abu Hamid, Muhammad bin Muhammad, al-Ghazali al-Tusi, al-Shafi'i al-Ash'ari, rahimahullah ta'ala. And he gives you three, this is what we call soteriology, if you want to look that up afterwards, or salvation theory, soteriology. Now what this is doing is saying, okay, who really will be saved on the Day of Judgment? So Al-Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says the following: anyone to whom the da'wah, meaning the call of Islam, came, and it came in the correct form, a true depiction of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was put before them, and they rejected it, فَهُوَ kafir, then such a person is a disbeliever and will go to hell. Okay. The second is somebody to whom the da'wah, the message, did not come aslan. It didn't come. Like maybe one of those not lost, but the tribes that don't want to be found in the Amazon rainforest, for example. That's people to whom the da'wah didn't come, right? There are some groups, I don't know if there are any truly left, that have been without some type of contact with the outside world, but they don't have any contact with the outside world. So those people, Al-Ghazali says, will be safe on the Day of Judgment. Remember, the Maturidis say, yes, they will be safe in everything except knowledge of God. That's where the Maturidis and Ash'aris are different. Bear that in mind. That's a very important distinction between the two. Now, that discussion requires a little bit more, because there's been some odd objections to this about trying to say that the Maturidis are like the Mu'tazila. This is wrong. And I'm going to do a separate video, probably in a different place, just addressing that issue and what the Maturidis really mean, and how they explain it. Because it's been a while that there's been a few people that have tried to make that link, and that's not a link, it's a leap. And it's a leap into an abyss of absolute ignorance and misunderstanding. Okay, now, Al-Ghazali says, but what if somebody is given the da'wah, but it's distorted? He said, even that person will be saved. Now, bear in mind, the da'wah being distorted means that it's not falsifiable, in the sense that they are not able to check it. For example, if if somebody was to give a misrepresentation of the Holy Prophet ﷺ to somebody today, to your work colleague, you're speaking to your work colleague and you give them you give them misinformation about Islam, like what happens today. You've got all of these people today, many of them who are suffering from some deep trauma, insecurity, some confidence issues, and they're signing up to all of these different, ideologies, and they're trying to mask all of that in Islam and using Islamic language. Now, naturally, when they're speaking, they could be disenfranchising a lot of Muslims by the things that they're saying, because what they're saying does not reflect the prophetic spirit. It doesn't have within it the beauty and the compassion of the Holy Prophet's character, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so, as the Holy Prophet said, yassiru wa la tu'assiru wa bashiru wa la tu'affiru. Make easy, don't make hard. Give glad tidings and do not push people away. Which means that we can do it. Now, that's a misinformation that's been given to somebody about Islam. But do they have the means for checking it up? Think about it. You're in a class right now. You're studying. You're taking notes. You'll look into things afterwards and cross-check and examine, and you'll ask questions, right? But if you could do that, why can't somebody else? Ummatul Ijaba is the ummah that accepts the message. Then you got prophetic tradition, hadith, Islamic theology. These are just some key terms for you there. Okay. Now the term ummah. This holds significant importance in Islamic theology, encapsulating the notion of a unified community bound by faith and belief in the teachings of al-Islam. Within the realm of hadith, the hadith sharif, the concept of ummah is elucidated through two distinct types, and I've explained those both to you now, ummatul da'wah and al-ijaba. Now, before I go into it, so al-Iji begins, I'll read the text for you, even though I can't put it on the screen right now. I forgot to put it into the... So he begins with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى الدواني says, قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. This is the matan. And I'll read from Dawani's commentary for barakah. وهو إنسان بعثه الله تعالى إلى الخلق. And Nabi is a person that Allah Ta'ala has sent to creation. Also in al-Qamus, the definition of a Nabi is given as al-Mukhbir an al-Ghayb bi-ilham min Allah. Al-Mukhbir an al-Ghayb, the one that gives you information of the unseen, bi-ilhamin, by way of being inspired, yani through revelation from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. لِتَبْلِغِ مَا أُوحِيَ إِلَيْهِ, to propagate what has been revealed to him. And the Shar carries on, and I don't want to carry on and go into what a Rasul is. We'll talk about that when we get to the section of Nabuwwah in the text. Here the Holy Prophet ﷺ, Iji mentions the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ straight away. So after he mentions that, there, قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. That's how he begins the text. The Prophet said, peace and blessings be upon him, سَتَفْتَرِقُ أُمَّتِي, my nation shall be divided ثَلَاثًا وَسَبْعِينَ فِرْقَةً, into 73 sects. Now, Ad-Dawani says, يعني, meaning i.e., Ummatul Ijaba. This became a point of contention, interestingly. Now, when the Prophet said, my nation, my ummah, you've learned ummahs of two types, Ummatul Da'wah, Ummatul Ijaba. when the Prophet said this, alayhi salatu wasalam, does he mean ummatul da'wah or ummatul ijaba? Which one does he mean? Now, Ad-Dawani is saying he means ummatul ijaba. But how do you know? How can you establish that now? You're going to get now an insight into how the ulama interpret a single word like ummah when used by the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Now, if you say ummatul da'wah, what does that mean? You can jump in. What does that mean? For this to be ummatul da'wah. My ummah meaning everyone after me. Muslim, Christian, Jew, Hindu, atheist are all ummatul da'wah. And they will be into 73 sects. What is the implication of that?
That the sects is referring to various religions.
The only saved sect is the Muslims.
Right. So what does that do to sectarianism in Islam? Right? It basically says that there is no sectarianism in Islam, that Islam is all just one. Doesn't matter what they do, what they believe, how bogus their belief. You know, they could be maybe in, really, really crazy beliefs, right? They're going to be what? Because the Prophet said that about these 73 sects, what did he say about them, alayhi salatu wasalam? He said, sorry, because this is a Sharna Hashia, I'm just trying to get the matan out. And he said, Kulluha finnar. Each one of those sects is in the fire illa wahida, except for one. Which means 72 sects are going to go to hell and one is going to go to Jannah. So that would then mean the kuffar will go to hell, but all of Muslims, al-Islamiyun, meaning anyone that has nisbah, that attributes Islam to themselves, says, I'm a Muslim. No matter how crazy or wild, bogus their beliefs may be, they will be in the Jannah, they will be in paradise. That's the implication of ummatu ad-da'wah, taking that as a meaning. Now, you're going to see here, so ummatu ad-da'wah, now in Surah An'am, Allah Ta'ala includes all of humanity, meaning that there are verses that could have that meaning, right? Allah Ta'ala often says, Ya ayyuhan nas, for example, or people. It includes everybody, Muslim and non-Muslim, etc. So there's a precedent, somebody could say. This is ummatul da'wah. Jalaluddin al-Dawani, again, I don't want to read too much from the text. Al-Dawani states that some commentators, shurrah al-hadith, he mentions, some commentators of hadith, when they're commenting on this hadith, they say this refers to ummatul da'wah, but this is weak. This is weak. Hence why he's mentioned here, ummatul ijaba. And Gilambawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, in his hashiyah, in his sort of super commentary or gloss, he mentions, who are these? He says, وَهُمْ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those who have believed, bihi, in Allah, fi jami'i, or in the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, fi jami'i ma ja'a bihi, in everything that he brought, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. وَأَجَابُوا لِدَعْوَتِهِ, and they responded to his call. وَهُوَ الظَّاهِرِ, and this is the apparent meaning, الرَّاجِحِ, which is preferred على إرادة أمة الدعوة, upon the meaning or the intended meaning of ummatul da'wah. Meaning, it is ummatu al-ijaba and not a da'wah. Not a da'wah. Now, what's the evidence for this? The term ummah used with the Holy Prophet ﷺ denotes a universal invitation to guidance. So it's ummatul da'wah, they would say. This interpretation transcends religious boundaries, emphasizing inclusivity in terms of the call. Our argument would be, the argument of Dawani and Galambi and the Asha'ira in general, is that yes, the ummatul da'wah and the Quran includes them in the call. But when the Prophet is talking about firaq, sects, groups, he's speaking about within ummatul ijaba, and he wants to give you some proofs now. Advocated by scholars like Jalaluddin al-Dawani rahmatullah alayh, says it's supported by linguistic and contextual evidence. He says this is the zahir, as I read from Gilambawi actually. Gilambawi was the one that used the word zahir of the verse. Gilambawi mentions the dalil for this as stated by al-Baydawi If you don't know who al-Baydawi is, a great Imam, Shafi'i, a great Mufassir, a great scholar of Usul al-Fiqh, legal theory, meaning, the principles upon which Islamic law is deduced, or from which Islamic law is deduced. So they sort of are the philosophers of Islamic law, so to speak, these legal, the masters of sort of legal theory, legal theorists, you could call them usuliyun. Now, Gilambawi states that when the hadith, Baydawi, so very important, in his tafsir of Quran is very important. So he brings this hadith under this verse. Why does Baydawi do that? Baydawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, indicates that this hadith, when he's using this hadith, that this hadith is referring to the ummah of ijaba and not da'wah. Now, Gilambawi goes on to give you some really interesting arguments. Firstly, he says, look at this. This is really a masterclass from Gilambawi on how to argue your case from language. So he says, the Prophet said ummati. This is idafa in the Arabic language. Mudaf and mudaf ilayh. Those of you that know Arabic, you know that this is like if I was to say, for example, if I was to say, here, let me put this a question to you. Zayd is a random person on the street. He's not significant, right? Let's say. I mean, every human being is significant, but he's not a prophet, let's say, right? I say, Kitabu Zaydin. Zayd's book, apostrophe S, the book of Zayd. Now, is there a difference between me saying Kitabu Zaydin and me saying Kitabullah? Question for you. Open question. What's the difference in your mind between Kitabu Zaydin and Kitabullahi? Allah's book. Come on.
When you ascribe it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's more honored.
Oh, good. Honored. Yes? Honored. Why is it honored? Has the book become honored by virtue of being annexed, linked to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Yes.
So this in Arabic is called idafa. Sorry, did you want to say something else?
No, okay, it's okay. I was just saying yes.
Okay, barakallah fiqh. So idafa tashrifiyya, sharaf. Tashrif is to give sharaf. Why? Ummati, my nation. The Prophet ﷺ is the best of creation. Salawatullahi wa salam alayhi. Al-Habib, al-A'zam, al-Mustafa, al-Nabiy al-Jalil, al-Ajal, al-Akmal, alayhi salatu wa salam. So when he attributes something to me, he says, that thing becomes musharraf. I remember one of our teachers, he was teaching the hadith of Man kharaja fi talab al-ilmi kana fi sabilillahi hatta yarji'a. And he said, anyone that leaves in the pursuit of knowledge is in the path of God, fi sabilillah, in the path of Allah, hatta yarji'a, until he or she returns, right? He returns. It's a mudhakkar sigha, so I'll translate it, but the mafhum is including of everybody. He said, this sabilullah, Allah is the mudaf ilayhi. Attributed to him is the sabil. He says Allah, ism jalala, is sharif, noble. Therefore the sabil becomes musharraf, ennobled. And therefore man kharaja fihi, anyone that trods on that path becomes musharraf. So Allah is noble and honorable. The path, his path is noble and honorable, and therefore the one on that path becomes noble and honorable, like everybody here today. May Allah Ta'ala accept it from all of us here, and Allah Ta'ala write this in our good deeds, and Allah Ta'ala make it a means by which we have light on the day of judgment, and Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala illuminate our graves by the barakah of sacred knowledge, and may Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala give us sincerity and ikhlas, and may it be for his sake, and may it bring a smile to the face of our Prophet ﷺ, and may this good deed of us be presented to him ﷺ, and that he be happy with it ﷺ, and that he thank his Lord as he told us in the Hadith ﷺ, and may we be raised inshallah ta'ala with all of this as jewelry on Yawm al-Qiyamah, allowing us to glow before the Holy Prophet ﷺ, bringing a smile to his blessed face, alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma ameen ya rabbal alameen. طيب. So Sharif. So now when he said Ummati, if the Ummah is Sharif, are Kuffar a part of that? It's a really good evidence. Think about that. Ummati, right? It's Sharif when he said that. My nation. That's a Sharaf. Sharaf is not given to Kuffar like that. No. Sharaf is for Al-Islam. But Sharaf is for them because of their faith, because of their Iman. Right? Do they have a Sharaf in terms of being makhluk? Yes. Do they have a Sharaf of being insan, humans? Yes, of course they are. Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. That we ennobled the children of Adam. Everyone has a karam. Everybody is mukarram. But the sharaf here being linked to the Prophet ﷺ are only for the people that responded to his call. Salawatullahi wa sallam alayhi, la ghayrihim. Not for anyone other than them, of the ummah of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. One proof. Gilambawi states that when the hadith is reported in this thematic style, it generally relates to the people of the Qibla. This is important. Let me give you an example. I remember reading when we read our first book in Ulum al-Hadith. And I remember when we read that there are 5 conditions that Shaykh al-Islam ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahmatullah alayhi gives for a hadith to be sahih in terms of the chain. And it was like, Dabt al-Rawi, it was Ittisal al-Sanad, continuous chain. The Rawi has to have good memory, Adala has to be just, no shadh, meaning it can't be a report, there can't be another report that is more stronger than it, more thiqah, etc. And one was illah. And illah meant like a hidden defect that you didn't pick up on. And I remember thinking to myself, how do you pick up on hidden defects? And I remember one of the discussions was that the muhaddithun, the imams of hadith, that they spend so much time with the words of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, that they can almost tell. Like sometimes if you know someone really well, and someone says so-and-so said X, and you say, but that doesn't sound like him. It's out of character. Like you wouldn't say that, right? Because you know that person. Interesting, isn't it? And so, for example, what some of the scholars they give as an example is that the Prophet ﷺ was a prophet and he spoke like a prophet. Right? He spoke like a prophet. He was a da'i, ilallah, Siraj al-Munir. That's what he was, alayhi salatu wasalam. So look what he used to say. Look at his statement. Listen to this, right? Imagine these ahadith, and you've heard all of these ahadith before. The Prophet would say, مَنْ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. Anyone that believes in Allah and the last day should speak well or be quiet. لَا يُؤْمِنُ أَحَدُكُمْ حَتَّى يُحِبَّ لِأَخِيهِ مَا يُحِبُّ لِنَفْسِهِ. None of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Min khair, in one report. And then when the commentators comment, what do they say? He doesn't mean faith as in you're a kafir. He means that you do not have iman kamil. Pure faith, perfect faith. Right? That there's you may have faith, you believe, you're a Muslim, you're a mu'min, but the quality of that faith is poor because you do not love for your brother what you love for yourself, or because you don't speak well and you harm people with your tongue, etc. The Prophet ﷺ would say, النكاح من سنتي فمن رغب عن سنتي فليس مني. Nikah, marriage is from my way. Anyone that turns away from my sunnah is not from me. The Prophet said in one hadith, anyone that engages in asabiyya, qawmiyya, tribalism in that sense, then he's not from us. And hadith, and anyone that introduces a matter that is not from amrina, from our affair, فَهُوَ رَدْ. Yeah. The Prophet ﷺ would speak like that. He would speak in that's the language of a prophet. Speaking, you do not believe unless this, you do not believe unless that. And also it's a miracle of the Quran too, by the way, because we have so many reports from the Prophet ﷺ, and the language is completely different to the Quran. Which is an interesting factor. When we do that later on, when we do the prophetology, we'll talk a little bit about that as well, inshallah ta'ala. Ala kullin, look at the style of speaking of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. Now if I was to tell you another report, and that language you can pick up on it, for sure, but your ears, that sounds like something that he would say. And that is his style of speaking. he used to speak qalla wa dalla, few words, great meaning, alayhi salatu wasalam. And so the Prophet ﷺ had this Jawami al-Kalim, very comprehensive in the speech. He'd say big statements like, you do not believe unless you do X. Even if he didn't, he wasn't actually meaning by it that you're a kafir. So you get to know. Now, Galambawi, and by the way, scholars do this in so many different issues. For example, issues to do with the iddah of a woman, for example, in divorce. Al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, his entire evidence is based upon how the word how the word is used in the Quran, how it's used in the Hadith. That when the Prophet ﷺ uses that word, what is your? They do this all the time. So Galambawi is using the same paradigm here. I'm mentioning this to give you an idea that Galambawi is not just grabbing things out of the air. He's using the paradigm of language, which is very, very commonplace within the Islamic tradition, intellectual tradition. So Galambawi rahmatullah alayhi says that when the Hadith uses this style of speaking, when the Prophet ﷺ speaks about my nation, he is referring to Ahlul Qibla, people of Qibla. Very important dalil, just in case someone thinks, really, do we have qualitative, quantitative studies to be able to identify this? Yes, and that's what Galambawi is saying. Okay. Galambawi states another proof, and he says that this cannot be Ummatul Da'wah. Why? Because they are not 72. Rather, kufr, there's two things he's going to say. Rather, kufr is millatun wahida. Al-Kalbī, rahimahullah ta'ala, in his famous At-Tasheel, it's a tafsir of Quran, fi ulum al-Tanzil. Very famous Andalusian scholar from Muslim Spain, rahimahullah ta'ala, an amazing tafsir. In this tafsir, and this is in other tafsir too, by the way, but it's just because I'm recalling it from that tafsir at this moment. When Allah Ta'ala says in Surah Baqarah, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولن ترضى عنك اليهود ولن ترضى عنك اليهود ولا النصارى حتى تتبع ملتهم, that the Jews and Christians will not be happy with you حتى, until تتبع ملتهم, until you follow their nation. Now Al-Kalbī points out here, rahimahullah ta'ala, that he mentioned Yahud and Nasara, Jews and Christians. Ajib. If he mentioned two, the pattern of the language should have been that he said, حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَيْهِمَا, from millatayni. حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَيْهِمَا. Millatayni, in the state of Nasab, for those that have Arabic, is the Tathniyah, the dual. Millatun is one nation. Millatani, in the state of the nominative state or the rough state in Arabic, is two. And millatayni is two again, but in the state of Nasab or Khafd, the accusative and the genitive state in the Arabic language, because it's a language of declension. If those of you that are familiar with Arabic or Latin is a language of declension, but Urdu and English are not. So sometimes people really struggle with that. But I'm telling you this for a reason. Millatay, and the noon drops because of idafa, just in case somebody is curious what's happening here. Millatayhima, that's what it should have been. Right? Now, Allah didn't mention that. Allah said, He didn't say, حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَيْهِمَا, He said, مِلَّتَهُمْ. حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُمْ. Millah. And then Al-Kalbī says, why? And then because there is a report, but I don't remember whether it's a hadith. As far as I remember, it's a hadith. Somebody can look it up and let me know. You can open your mic. Or it's a athar, meaning it's a qawl, maybe to one of the Sahaba. So I don't want to make that statement in case I'm wrong. But as I remember, there is a hadith. Maybe it's, if I remember, it's in the... Ala kullin, I'll come back. Now, Allahumma salli ala sayyidina, where the statement is al-kufru millatun wahida. Disbelief is one millah. And Ad-Dawani mentions, or Galambawi mentions, that in the very least, in the principle of them being kufr, they're one nation. They're one nation in their kufr. Right? So, from that perspective, if you say that the 72 sects are the Ummatul Da'wah, which includes the Jews, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, everybody, well, they're not actually 72, the 73rd being Islam. They're not 72, they're one. So the hadith cannot be for Ummatul Da'wah. I hope you appreciate that point. Very nuanced, very interesting. So he said no, because if the Prophet, remember, in Islamic legal theory, we have something called khas and am. Khas is when a statement is made specific. Specific. When a statement is made, now it's very difficult for you to make that am. The usuliyun differ, but it's a specific statement. It has to be understood specific unless there's an evidence that is strong enough to come and abrogate that aspect of it. Meaning take it from being a specific statement to a general statement. طيب. Now, if kufr is millatun wahida, that's one. What are the other 71 groups? So it can't be that. Furthermore, he says, if you say it includes kuffar, well, they are a lot more than 72 in principle, let alone in subsidiary issues, furu'a. The Christians are very different to the Jews, and the Jews very different to the Buddhists, and amongst themselves even. He goes, even if you looked at them in the broadest categories of Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, whatever it may be, if you count all of the milal, and they are entire Al-Asfahani has an entire book on al-milal. If you look at books even today of al-Adyan, of the different deens, these different milal, they are huge in number. So it says, well, if it's one, the hadith doesn't fit, so therefore it's Ummatul Ijabah. If you do count them, they're more than 72 anyway, so the hadith doesn't fit. The hadith is for Ummatul al-Ijabah. Those are 4 proofs that...
Also, I have a question on this point.
Tafaddal.
You know how it is mentioned that the number 70 sometimes is not taken, or could not, sometimes it may not be taken literally, and it may mean a large number of a thing, right? And there's wording in this hadith that the Jews and the Christians split into, was it 71, 72, and then for this, for us it was 73.
Yeah.
So Christian sects, at least, I'm not too familiar with Judaism, it would seem that the number of factions for them exceeds 71. So could that not then mean that in our case, the 72 means a large number that exceeds what happened in previous ummahs?
Absolutely, yeah, that's a good point. And there's 2 things I'll say on this. One is, it's definitely possible, because the Prophet ﷺ, that's from his style of speech as well. They'd say, I make istighfar 60 times a day. Did he mean 60, or did he just mean a large number, for example? So yeah, fully with you on that one. However, there's something that you have to understand about ta'wil in our usul tradition. One is that when you want to interpret something, you need a qarina. You need some factor, some factor in context, or a different evidence, supporting evidence, corroborating evidence, whatever it may be, in order for you to justify that ta'wil. Why? Because the way Muslim scholars, jurists and theologians treat revelation is that it is always taken at face value unless we are compelled to make ta'wil. Like, for example, the common example in the Ash'ari tradition is certain things that Allah says about himself, like Yadullah, Allah's hand, Wajhullah. Here, we are compelled to believe that the metaphoric meaning is intended, even if we as Maturidis do not state that metaphoric meaning and we assign it to God, or as Ash'aris, we suggest the possible, plausible meaning, and we say most likely it's that, even if we don't have iman in it, but we do still say it. So whether you do tafweed al-ma'na or you do ta'wil al-ma'na, the Ash'aris and Maturidis respectively, in any case, the point is that there was a reason. What was that reason? Tanseem. Because if we took yad, hand, literally, this part or whatever, this body part, this appendage, then that is going to mean that God has parts. And a part is an action and it's a quality, and quality is temporal, and therefore God is temporal. Like, it's a problem, right? So we were forced to make ta'wil there. We don't rush to it. It's only when you're compelled to make ta'wil that you make it, because now you know that that's not the muradul kalam. That's not what the speech meant. Now, with this here, although you're right, Sidi Hassan, I think it was Sidi Hassan that asked the question. Allah bless you. You're right, it's possible. But do we have a qarina to tell us that? Because we should just take it as face value. That's how we take revelation. Ala zahir al-nas. We take it as the revelation has come, unless when we're forced into taking it as a metaphor. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Also with the Christians, you have to remember something. You might have sub-denominations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're an individual firqa. Like, for example, you can have different types. You can have Protestants, Anglicans, you can have Catholics, you got Greek Orthodox, you do have some big ones. It's not necessarily every sort of, in that case, like, in the early part of Islam, if you had a sheikh that had like one unique opinion, they would name like a whole sect after that. So it'll just be, you can check this out for yourself. Check this out for yourself. Go and read Al-Firaq by Ibn Farruq. I forget the name now. We'll come back to you on Muhammad. Go and read Maqalat al-Islamiyyin by Imam al-Ashari himself. Sometimes it'll be a shaykh and two students, and that's like a sect. So is that really a sect? Or do they come under the Murji'ah broadly? Do they come under the Qadariyah broadly? Do they come under the Jabariyah broadly? Do they come under I'tizal broadly? You see what I'm trying to say? Like, for example, the Ithna Ashariyah. You've got like the Fuqaha from them, which I think are the ones that are based in Iran. And then you've got I forget the name of the other ones that are based in sort of central...
Akhbaris, right?
Akhbaris, that's it. Jazakallah khairan. And I think they're based in like Central Asia, I think, right? Or Afghanistan, that type of thing. Yeah, they're like Bukharis, I'm pretty sure.
So I get what you're saying then. If we were to kind of look at it that way, then all the subsects of the Mu'tazila would kind of like use up
Yes.
like 15, 20.
So it doesn't necessarily
essentially.
mean that the subsects are separate sects. They could be under that broad sect. And so too will it be true for the Christian and Jews. Not all of the subsects need to be independent sects. So there's a lot, you see. So this is why it's difficult to give a definitive answer on that. So what will we do? There's not enough qara'in or qarinas, these factors, to make us interpret 72 as a metaphor. So you're perfectly right in that ihtimal, that possibility is there. But unless we have a qarina, we just take it on the apparent meaning and say, if that's what the Prophet said, then that's what he said. Does that make sense, Sidi Hassan?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Barakallah feek.
Thank you.
Allah bless you. Alright, now just to wrap up, the last, so you've seen 4 evidences now from al-Allama al-Gilambawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, Idafat al-Sharifiyya being 1. Secondly, that the style of the hadith, when the Prophet speaks normally about his nation, he's speaking about Ahlul Qibla. Number 3, that there isn't a multitude of sects of the kuffar, they're millatun wahid. That's an argument. It may not be the strongest argument, but it's an argument. Because even in my mind, I can have a counter argument to that. Even the hadith itself is speaking about the Jews and Christians breaking up into sects. But nevertheless, it's an argument that's there. Number 4, that there are a lot more than 70 sects in principle, let alone in subsidiary issues. Now, here, the Prophet said in the hadith, كُلُّهَا فِي النَّارِ سَتَفْتَرِقُ أُمَّتِي, my nation is going to separate into 73 فرقة, into 73 sects, right? كُلُّهَا, all of them, أي كُلُّ الفرقة, every sect, في النار, إلا واحدة, except for one. So he said كُلُّهَا. Now the hadith has moved from a verbal sentence to a nominal sentence. Now what does that mean? When the Prophet ﷺ starts the hadith, what does he say? Sa taftariqu ummati. Taftariqu is a fi'al mudari', if you think about it. It's a present tense or an imperfect tense. Sometimes they call it that. It's a present tense verb. Singular, feminine, third person. Sa taftariqu ummati. That's a verb. So he's begun the sentence with a verb, and then he says, kulluha. Kullu is a noun. Now this is just pure linguistics. In the Arabic language, this is a rhetorical device that when in a statement you move from a verbal sentence into a nominal sentence, then this gives the meaning of dawam and thabat. Dawam, which means continuity. Continuity. So now, this is really interesting. So let me read it and then I'll come back to it. Dawam is also of two types, thabat and tajaddud. So thabat means forever, continuous, no break. Tajaddud is when I say he continued on, which means that he continued, he stopped, he continued again, he persevered, he stopped. There's tajaddud, but he got to the end, the finish line. So if I said I completed a marathon, I persevered, I continued. Yeah? Like dumtu. Like I was like da'im, continuously on the race. That doesn't mean I didn't take a break. It just means I persevered to the end. So tajaddud is a possible meaning. But also thabat is a meaning. So which one of these meanings of dawam is it going to be? So then he goes on to say, he goes, okay, kulluha, this is the mubtada, the subject of a sentence, the nominal sentence, the jumla ismiya. It's going to have a predicate, a khabar. Let me give you a simple example. If I said Zaydun qa'imun, Zayd is the subject, the mawdu', and qa'im, standing, is the predicate, the khabar or the mahmul. What judgment are you placing on Zayd? He's standing. So that is are. That comes in between two words. One's called a subject, one's called a predicate. In Arabic, one's called a mubtada, one's called a khabar, or a mawdu' and a mahmul. These are just some technical terms, you don't have to worry about them. I'm only giving it for those that I know that are tulab al-ilm, and they may appreciate that a little bit more. So now if the predicate is a noun, kulluha is a noun, then it means thabat. If the khabar, the predicate was a verb, then it would mean tajaddud. But here it's a noun. So therefore it's thabat. So it's really interesting as I'm going to repeat it once again, that the Prophet ﷺ begins the sentence, the statement, as with a verb, and then he moves into a noun. When this happens, it gives the meaning of continuity. Why? Because a verb indicates now. I say, for example, Ana ajlisu, I am sitting. That doesn't mean I sit perpetually. Ana ajlisu yani al-an, I'm sitting now. Maybe sa'ajlisu li 5 daqa'iq, li 10 daqa'iq, li sa'a, maybe for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, for an hour. It doesn't mean, but when I say ana jalis, which is a noun, a active participle, ismul fa'il, when I say ana jalis, this gives the meaning of continuity, that I sit. So meaning I'm here for a long time. Now that sitting can now mean forever, God forbid, or it could mean tajaddud, that I'm generally here, this is my office, I'm generally here, I might go home sometimes, I might go take a break and go for a walk or get up and pray salah, whatever, but I'm generally here. So I say, ana jalis huna, I am sitting here. It doesn't mean I'm going to be there every single moment, it just means I'm generally here with some tajaddud. So then he says, well, because both of those meanings are there, let's say in jalis, or in this case kulluha, then which one is it? So he says, well, if the khabar, the predicate, was a verb, then it would have the meaning of tajaddud. But if it's a noun, because a noun is stronger than a verb in the Arabic language, by the way. That's why it's called ism. Ism, literally, one of the meanings is to be lofty. It's the strongest thing in a sentence in Arabic. So if it's a noun, it means sabat. So this is interesting. If it means sabat, let me ask you, believers are going to go to hell that make mistakes. But are they going to have thabat in hell? Are they going to stay there forever? It's a question. Are Muslims who believe in Allah and the Prophet and the Quran have no problems in their belief, but due to their actions, they will go to hell? Are they going to remain therein forever? What's the position of Ahl-Sunnah on this?
No.
Sorry?
No.
No. Barakallahu fikum. No. Muslims will always eventually enter into Jannah. There may be perjury, penitence that takes place, but may Allah Ta'ala protect us from that and enter us into the gardens. Ameen. Now, but if this is thabat is for the kuffar. So the hadith means 72 sects are including the kuffar. It's everybody. It includes the kuffar. That's an argument, isn't it? That's a counter argument. So the response given to this is what? This statement is actually what they call mutlaqa ama, qadiyya mutlaqa ama. This is a technical term used in logic. This means that this statement will take place at some point, and there is dawam in that one point. So for example, if I was to say a statement mutlaqan, ana jalis, I am sitting, I'm here. But if I said ana jalis fi sabah, in the morning, now what have I done? I put a qaid, I put a restriction on it. Ana jalis fil masa, in the evening, I put a qaid. Ana jalis li khamsat sa'at, I'm sitting for 5 hours, qaid. I've restricted. But when it's mutlaq, the qaida is what? Al-mutlaqu yajri ala itlaqihi, as the usuli scholars say. That when you have a statement that is mutlaq, it's unrestricted, it remains upon that, and it is unrestricted. So now, this means that this statement will take place at some point. So when the Prophet ﷺ said, kulluha fin nar, it doesn't necessarily mean fin nar from the beginning of the fire till the end of the fire, or for eternity. No, it just means at some point. And some Muslims will go to Jahannam at some point for a period of time. So the argument that Gilambawi gives back is that this is not, they've misunderstood. Although the argument that you're making about this kulluha being a noun and the khabar being a noun and therefore being thought, he goes, that's all good. He goes, but this qadiyya is mutlaqa amma. Because it's mutlaqa amma, it's general, it will happen in waqt min al-awqat. In one point, one period, from periods. For example, you say to me, can you send me these slides, for example? And I say, I will. But in English it doesn't work to say I'm a sender. It doesn't work. But I say ana mursil. In Arabic that works. I'm a sender, meaning, because in English we only have the verb. In Arabic you have the ismul fa'il as well, which is a shibh fi'l. It's like a fi'l, like a verb, even though it's actually a noun. So I can now say ana mursil. I'm a sender. Now, when I make that statement, ana mursil, does that mean I'm going to send it to you now, and then in the next second, and next second, and next second, for all of eternity? It's possible that means you could have that. But that's not what I meant. I used a qadiyya mutlaqa amma, said ana mursilu hadhihi ar-risala ilayk. I'm going to send this to you mutlaqan at some point. I'll get to it. I'm busy. I don't have so much time. Bear with me. Be kind to me. Waqt min al-awqat. Mafhum? So that's what they mean when they say that, which I think is a very, very clever response by al-Allama al-Gilambawi. So you can see this style of dialectics that they're having, that they're putting these objections and they're responding. So, one, that they train the student critical thinking, and the other is any doubts that anyone may have, plausibly could have, they are uprooting all of those from the get-go. This is also sometimes called the Socratic method, but in our tradition it's called al-i'tirad wal-jawab, and in the Arabic tradition it's called fanqalaqa, fa'in qulta qultu, if you say, I say. It's a proper tradition, it's a pedagogy of teaching, and here you're having a masterclass of it given by the great Al-Imam Al-Gilambawi rahimahullah ta'ala. So he says, the hadith, then he goes and says, the hadith says except one. So that would mean that they can never go to hell. But we know that some Sunnis will go to hell, but is from the amal and not the belief. So that's his last point that he says, that look, when we're talking about the kuffar being in the fire, they are going there because of their belief. And when we talk about the believers that go to hell, they are not going there because of their belief is pure. They're going there because of the elections. So in any case, he says, the argument doesn't stand, that this is referring to a general statement that the firqas will go to hell, even if eventually they will go to paradise. Also, right at the end, he mentions that al-thabat can also be a metaphor. You don't have to take it exactly literally. Let me stop showing that. Tayyib. So that is his way. I mean, the point of this lesson today, as Maulana requested me to do, was just to talk about the concept of the firqa najiyah, because that's the hadith with which al-Allāmah Aduddin al-Iji al-Qāḍī Aḍud rahimahullah ta'ala al-Shafi'i al-Ash'ari, how he begins his text. Now normally, and he wanted to put this out just like that. Now normally, I'll be honest with you, for the rest of the text, and I think there's quite a lot of you that are actually in my other class, the Badul Amali class, and you've probably found that we do struggle to get through the text quickly because of the amount of information that sometimes is required, even at quite a basic level, because it's just kalam and it requires that. But I don't hope to do that with this in that way. I do hope to do it, but I hope to find a balance where it still has the density and the beauty and unpacking and exposing its secrets, but in a way that we can actually cover the entire text, inshallah ta'ala. How we're going to do that, I don't know. But inshallah, I do hope that we will be able to do that, inshallah ta'ala. But sometimes you have fun with the students and they enjoy it and you feel like going on. So it's a wonderful text and it's very interesting because, may I add, it's a very unorthodox way actually of beginning a text. The Ash'ari books do not begin with قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. They don't. So the fact that he began it like that is very, very interesting. So what he's basically saying in the book is, قال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام ستفترق أمتي 73 فرقة كلها في النار إلا واحدة. And then he says, وهم أي the فرقة الناجية أهل السنة والجماعة. Mullah Nizam al-Din al-Sihalwi, I'll probably read for you. I'll send it to you maybe. I'll send it to Maulana. He'll have it sent to you. Where Mullah Nizam al-Din actually commenting on that. Who are the Ash'aris and the Maturidis? I think I will recommend that the 2 podcasts that were done with Khairabadi up until date, if you haven't seen them, watch them. And now that you've understood that there's one firqa najiyah that's saved on the Day of Judgment, that's pure in its creed, are the Ash'aris and Maturidis. If you want to know about those 2, then watch the 2 podcasts, because the first one's about Ash'aris and the second one's about Maturidis. And that can be the commentary on what the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jamā'ah, what we mean, whom are we referring to when we say it. And we'll begin the actual text of discussions on wujud and the Sifat al-Bari Ta'ala and all of those lovely, important, wonderful, sharif, noble, honorable discussions, inshaAllah Ta'ala. If there's any questions, Bismillah, what we've got, it's been 1 hour and 42. I know a lot of that was issues, technical issues at the beginning. Let's say we could take maybe 5 minutes of questions, 4 or 5 minutes, couple of questions. If anyone's got questions, we'll take them. Otherwise, we'll recite Fatiha and finish. Tafaddal, Sidi Bilal, just open your mic, fire away.
Maulana, my question was with regards to the Ahlul Sunnah being the majority, which is what we've understood. Does that mean the majority of the ulama over the centuries, or does it mean the majority of Muslims altogether?
The ummah. There's not just ulama. Yes, let me tell you something. So, for the Asha'ira, if you look at the books, like open up al-Barahin, for example, they will start off with, and the Risala of al-Bajuri and any of those introductory texts, they will say, يَجِبُ عَلَى كُلِّ مُكَلَّفٍ. It's wajib, fard ayn. Remember, these are Shafi'is writing. When they say wajib, they mean fard, not what Hanafis mean. Hanafis make a distinction between the 2. So, it's a farz. You know how reading namaz is fard. More important than that is to have a sound aqidah. Because what are you going to do with your namaz if your aqidah is batil? So it's wajib to have iman. Now, is the iman of a muqallid jaiz or not? Sidi Bilal. For example, the scholars debated this. That if I blindly follow my shaykh and I don't know what belief is correct. Now, I don't talk about like atoms and accidents and all of that. No. I'm talking about Allah, He has knowledge, power, Aqidah Tahawiyya level. If I'm a blind follower, majority of the scholars, not all, there are some, but majority of them say such a person is a mu'min, is a believer, but they're a sinner. Why are they a sinner? Because they could be misguided بِتَشْكِيكِ الْمُشَكِّكِ, that someone can come and put doubts in your mind, as we see all the time. I know somebody, I've had my own experiences as well, but I know somebody who said to me, I did philosophy at A-levels, ethics, and it's only when I studied Kalām much later that those doubts were removed. I just kept them in the back of my head. I know a brother who did ethics at university and left Islam. So it's wajib. And in our time, where you've got this democratization of knowledge and everyone's got access to it and everyone's listening to podcasts and people talking about, I mean, you don't have to go beyond just the normal sort of punditry of a podcast, like, you know, Joe Rogan or something, where they'll have somebody on there. You know, you could be watching Valuetainment and they'll have some discussion about Christianity, or they'll have something on atheism or something to do with morals, morality, ethics. It's all part of Kalām. And so, I mean, that's why most people have bought into these sort of modern phenomenon, you know, sort of modern moral frameworks, and that's why we have the problems that we have. That's why we're having to, can we reinterpret the Quran? Can we change this? You know, you have Muslims that suffer from theophobia, which is they believe in God but they wish they didn't, because they don't want to practice it. Because they've imbibed a liberal worldview and they can't get rid of it, and now they're trying to interpret the Quran through that lens. So these are all, now is that, it was wajib for them to have learnt the Aqidah, the Kalām, the system, moral framework, moral ontology beforehand. So once they had that framework, when they go out into the wide world and someone says, but this is a human right, or this is this and that, for them, they've already got a set of principles by which they're working. They've got a paradigm. But when they've got no paradigm, just watching common culture, TV shows, drama, soap operas, whatever you call them, movies, whatever, all of that, your books, novels that you read as children, all of that gives you a certain mindset and worldview. And if you weren't trained in the religious Islamic worldview, it's very easy. And we're just seeing it, we look at it, just look around. We're all suffering from it in one way or another. So the taqleed is not an option. At-taqleedu fil iman la yajuz. That's the principle. Taqleed, blind imitation in iman. In fiqh, yes, it's necessary. In like law, in iman, no, you have to know. Now, it's ijmalan. You don't have to know tafsil, detail. Generally, you have to know. Like, for example, I've tested it. Try it. Like, if your grandmother's alive, if you're, you know, elderly, ask them and say to them, do you believe in Allah? Of course I believe in Allah. Why? They'll be like, oh, who made this dunya? Yeah, yakfi hada. Like, that's enough, because they've understood the contingency argument. They might not be able to articulate it with all of its technical terms, but they understand it. You know, like the old lady who was sweeping the floor, and al-Razi entered, and so there was a big procession to greet Imam al-Razi, and they said to the lady, you need to go out the road, don't you know Fakhruddin al-Razi is coming? She said, who's that? And the man that knows 99 proofs of the existence of God, and she scoffed, and she said, he needs 99 proofs, I only ever needed one. Right? So when Imam al-Razi, someone told him that, he made dua and he said, oh Allah, give me the faith of the old lady, the ajuza. Give me her faith, right? So ijmal. But it can't be taqleed. It can't just be, oh, I'll just follow it because my mum told me, my dad told me. No. There has to be serious contemplation, even if there's no detail to it. I don't know what your original question was, if that answers the question. But yeah, that's what I'll say. Sidi Hassan, if you have a question.
Jazakallah.
Barakallahu fikum.
Yeah, this is just more kind of like the interpreting the actual mention regarding entering hellfire, and Allah protect us all. Have the ulama talked about looking at this like linguistically in terms of a minimum? So like, is it conceivable that like a very, very, very small number of people actually enter hellfire, such that like from the Muslims, I'm saying that whoever essentially committed the major sins, like, and even from amongst them, it's only so many that the threat wasn't empty, it was carried out, and that's it. Like a double-digit number of people and that's it for the entire ummah? Or is there kind of like that quantity that we usually imagine Muslims?
I don't know about quantity per se, but I will say this. There is unfortunately a huge amount of people in the ummah that it's not really about amal. See, the mu'amala with Allah is that you can expect Him to forgive you. And the Prophet did say, shafa'ati li kaba'ir min ummati. Yeah? My intercession is for the major sinners, in fact. Now, we do have the hadith of Shifa where He will take people out of hell. So, the people of kaba'ir will enter hell. I mean, not guaranteed. I mean, Allah can forgive whomever He wants. Maybe it's a mother's dua, a son's, a daughter's dua, a teacher's dua. It could be anything, that someone, you put a pound into somebody's hand that was needy and they made dua for you. And, those are endless, the possibilities. But a lot of people are going to be tripped up, Sidi Hassan, in their aqidah. They will. It's unfortunate. But there will be a lot of people, unfortunately. And this is why Allah does say in the Quran, وَأَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. أَكْثَرُهُم, He says. The majority of them. لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Now what does that look like? All of that. This is Allah's haqq and His sha'an. What will happen on the Day of Judgment. But there's a lot of people with really bogus beliefs that say things that are just unimaginable. They're just unimaginable. And so a lot of the Muslims that will get tripped up won't necessarily be for amal. I think there's going to be a large aspect of forgiveness and mercy, but certainly from the perspective of i'tiqad being problem. Alright, I need to wrap up and there's like 4 hands. I'm going to go quickly through this. Shahid, as quickly as possible. Do you have a question, Sidi?
Yeah, Salim, Sheikh. First of all, Jazakallah khairan. Really appreciate your time today. It's a good question, Sheikh. For those people who want to give some sort of proficiency or expertise within the Maturidī school in particular, for example, as a Hanafi, I wouldn't describe myself as a fanatic, but you know that the Hanafi school is just more than a school of fiqh, but rather it's a tradition, right, which extends to all of the other sciences. Would you recommend this course for somebody who would want to kind of stay within that tradition and have that coherency and consistency across the board, or?
Well, that's a good question. That's an excellent question. I would say 2 things. One is the Asharis and Maturidis don't differ a whole lot. That's one thing. The other thing is that the Asharis and Maturidis are considered as one hizb, one group. So it's not like that's different. Now you're probably, I'm assuming, on the Badr al-Amali course, if Maturidi is your thing. But now what you get is a comparison. The other thing is my style of teaching is that I normally point out the differences, as you saw that I did today with the issue of Bulugh al-Da'wah. I pointed out the difference. So I do like to point out those differences as I'm going along. So I would recommend that you, well, it's entirely up to you. Time, all of that sort of stuff is important. But for me, it's not about what text you've studied. It's more about how many, because you mature with the subject, right? So what happens with Kalām is that the more you're hearing it, like for example, you may have heard me speaking in the last lesson an hour and a half, 2 hours ago. Now you're hearing me again, some things overlap. Then we'll keep on studying, then we'll do another book and another book. And what happens is, by the 4th, 5th book, you've clocked it all. That's called tadarruj. It's just tadarruj. Everybody has to go through that. Same thing with learning languages, with learning a skill. I'm sure in whatever you do in life, your profession or your studies or whatever you're doing, it's not an overnight thing. Same thing with Kalām, because it's a paradigm of thinking and not just a set of doctrine that you're memorizing. It takes a little bit of time to mature with the subject. So I recommend all courses, as many as you can take, as long as you've got the time. May Allah Ta'ala give you himmah. I recommend it. Especially, because even the way we worked this out is good. Because we didn't feel like it was a contradiction. And the reason for that is because one was Maturidi, one was Ash'ari. They complement each other. Barakallahu feekum. Barakallahu feekum, Sidi. Ahnaf? A lot of questions.
Sorry, just a really quick question. Going back to what you said earlier about the Saved Sect, you said that it's the 2 schools of Ash'ari and Maturidi. I've seen a lot of people identify as Hanbali/Athari. So what about them? Would they count as part of the Saved Sect or not, in your opinion?
The Athariya.
Clarify that. Yeah.
The original Athariya, like Shaykh al-Islam, Muwafiq al-Dīn, Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, وَمَنْ كَانَ مِثْلُهُ. Yes? like Imam al-Tahawi, who's Maturidi, but his text is written in Athari fashion. So those Atharis, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, absolutely, they are from Ahl-Sunnah wal-Jamā'ah, absolutely. But is somebody an Athari today who calls themselves Athari? I don't know. I don't know. And you know what? Make dua. I'm going to teach Lum'atul I'tiqad of Ibn Qudam al-Maqdisi, and I'm going to highlight the hypocrisies of many people that claim Athari Aqidah today. Because I will show you from what contemporary, quote-unquote, pseudo-Hanbalis, I'm not being mean here, I'm not even being personal. Like, this is just what it is. Like, I'm saying this purely academically and from a purely objective point of view, that what contemporary, quote-unquote, Hanbali writers are writing, some of them, not all, and what the classical Hanabila wrote. If I can ask all of you to recite Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawm الدين. نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وعلى
الحمد للمتوحد بجلاله